In this episode, I cover the last 10 albums on my Elton Ranked Albums list. I should make clear that I understand completely that videos like this one are all just a matter of opinion, and that others will see things differently than I do, and that compassion and understanding is very important. Welcome to Collecting Elton. This one's gonna hurt. In this episode, the last of my ranked albums videos, I cover my 10 least favorite Elton albums, which, to help soothe any hurt feelings out there, I've divided into 4 subcategories. I don't get it, kinda sucks, really sucks, and the worst category of all, sucks out loud. Here we go. Alright, the first of the I Don't Get It albums. Released in 2013 and produced by T-Bone Burnett, The Diving Board was one of the most anticipated new studio albums from Elton in years. Originally scheduled for fall of 2012, Diving Board's release was delayed at least twice until the album finally appeared in the fall of 2013. The reason? Elton felt unsatisfied with the original version of the album, which was to be called Voyeur, so he and Bernie just wrote more stuff. When The Diving Board appeared that September, I remember feeling underwhelmed. The delays had created such anticipation, I think, that for me, the album's release seemed like an anticlimax. Characterized by dark, brooding themes, most of the album's songs meandered so deep into mystery and artsiness, it seemed like Elton had forgotten to give them melodies. And I found the album difficult to connect to personally. I do remember the album's lead single, Home Again, playing a lot on the radio in the South the summer that I moved there, and so that track had a lot of personal meaning for me, and I liked it at the time. And even more than 10 years later, Home Again is still the only song on The Diving Board that I find even remotely interesting, and it's been probably years since I've played even that song. But I've met many Elton fans who love this album, even its sleeve, whose design I think might have been better used on the front of a Psych 101 college textbook. I can hear the effort and the craftsmanship that Elton, Bernie, and producer T-Bone Burnett invested in this project, and I know well that the album received great reviews and many other accolades. It's just that despite repeated listens, the album has never grabbed me. Except for Home Again, I don't get it. My show copy is an original 2013 issue, cut by Ron McMaster at Capitol Mastering in Los Angeles and pressed by GZ Media. Universal re-released the album on vinyl as a remaster a couple years ago. I have that copy, but I haven't yet played it. I'm not sure that I ever will. Next is another of Elton's more recent efforts. Recorded in Los Angeles and co-produced by T-Bone Burnett and Elton himself, Wonderful Crazy Night was released in February 2016. Whatever Elton had wanted this album to be, I found it neither wonderful nor crazy, at least not the album's standard 10-track version. I remember buying it as early as I could on vinyl, and that purchase marked the first time that I'd ever bought my very first copy of a new Elton John album exclusively on vinyl. But I didn't have a turntable at the time, so I bought one of the CD versions later that February on a visit home to Canada, and that was the very first copy I ever heard. And I couldn't get into it. I remember trying to play it several more times after that, but it didn't grab me at all. It wasn't until years later, when I happened to hear the expanded version's 2 bonus tracks, England and America and Free and Easy, that I developed any affection for the album. I adore those 2 bonus tracks. England and America is easily one of my all-time top 25 John Taupin songs. But the standard album still seems dull to me. 9 years later, and I still don't get it. Okay, my show copy is the original US vinyl issue, which was on the Island label, and it was cut by Ron McMaster at Capitol in Los Angeles and pressed by United Record Pressing in Nashville. It's different in some ways from the recent reissue in that the original copy's spine is solid black and with white text, and it looks very retro to me, anyway, when sitting on a shelf. The reissue spine, by contrast, is a full bleed with text over top that, which makes the spine label more difficult to read. Now that might be more of a problem if the urge wasn't so strong just to leave the album sitting on the shelf. When the next album was released in March of 2000, I was just finishing my freshman year of college and living on my own for the first time. And although I never had any serious intentions of entering the music business, I was also at that time into writing and recording songs of my own, doing home recording, in other words. One day I learned that Elton had just released a soundtrack to a cartoon feature called The Road to El Dorado. I figured Elton's new album would inspire my own writing and recording activities, so after finding a copy of the album in my college bookstore, of all places, I headed back to my place, broke the shrink on that CD, and let the inspiration process begin. Well, beyond its first 2 tracks, which I still like and play sometimes, I couldn't get into the album at all. It was the first full album of Elton recorded tracks that Elton John and Tim Rice had ever written together, and I do like it when Elton and Rice collaborate. I mean, hey, they did The Lion King, right? Well, I think The Lion King was something different. I don't think Road to El Dorado is a bad album. It's just that I've met some fans who, they just adore the album, but me, I guess I just don't get it. I'd have maybe ranked El Dorado a little higher than number 34 on my list, but it's never been released on vinyl, which I consider an offense to good taste, even if a vinyl copy would probably require at least 2 LPs, if not 3. So for this one, my show copy is the CD copy that I bought that day on campus, and it's a Canadian copy, which incidentally didn't have the inner tray design that the US copies did. Not that that would have improved it much. Alright, now we're getting into the kinda sucks part of this list. Hard to believe maybe, but even in Elton's early years, DJM recorded many of his key live performances. Now whether DJM recorded these shows for posterity or merely to release live albums down the line is not clear, but these tapes certainly came in handy in 1976, when someone decided that Elton's catalog needed a second live album. Released that spring, the original 9-track Here and There presented excerpts from 2 of Elton's 1974 performances. Side 1 featured selections from Elton's May 74 show at London's Royal Festival Hall, and Side 2 featured selections from Elton's November 28, 1974 show at New York's Madison Square Garden, the latter show now considered one of rock's most historic concerts. But except for the version of Skyline Pigeon that opened Side 1, and the opening few minutes of Funeral for a Friend on Side 2, even as a kid I'd always found the original Here and There a real snooze. I'd even read, as I grew older, that the November 74 show at Madison Square Garden was the same show where John Lennon appeared and performed 3 songs with Elton and the band. And I found it perplexing why the original Here and There had turned out as it did. It seemed almost like the person selecting its tracks had deliberately withheld the best of both shows. It wasn't until 1995, when copies of the Classic Years reissue appeared, remixed, resequenced, and expanded to 2 CDs, that I began to really enjoy the album. And I must say, the expanded version makes a fantastic live album. The first CD contains probably my favorite live version of Bad Side of the Moon. The second CD includes tracks with the Muscle Shoals Horns, and all 3 tracks with John Lennon. The expanded version more than adequately captures Elton's dynamic live abilities in the mid-1970s with his Classic Years band. So if I could rank Here and There based on its 1995 expanded version, it would likely rank somewhere in the 10s on my list. But no, using the original album as my basis, I rank it down here at number 35. Compared to what it could have been, the original Here and There kinda sucks. So my show copy for this one is my original 1976 Canadian MCA copy, which was pressed by Keel, manufacturing in Ajax. And Here and There was the only album, the only one that I've ever seen anyway, for which MCA allowed the use of a white variant label for Side 1, kind of like a white rainbow label design, and then Side 2 is just the standard black rainbow design. And this copy was my mother's originally. She bought it as soon as it came out, but she didn't like it very much. And when I was a kid, and very little kid, and just getting into Elton's stuff, I remember she handed me pretty much all her Elton records, but without telling me, she left this one in our storage room so that she wouldn't have to hear it played on the family stereo. I didn't find it until a few years later. But yeah, 15 or so years after the album's original release, and even my mom still couldn't stand to hear this album. And you know what, Mom? I agree. The original Here and There kinda sucks. Alright, number 36, the last Kinda Sucks album on my list. Yes, they get even worse from here. This album is often suggested on various lists and in fan discussions online as possibly Elton's worst album. And yes, it may well be, but on my list it just kinda sucks, which means it isn't so bad, just maybe kinda bad. Released in October 1986 and recorded partly in Holland, Leather Jackets was produced by Gus Dudgeon. In fact, it was the last studio album that Dudgeon would ever produce for Elton John. The problem with Leather Jackets, in my opinion, isn't the songs. Except for one or two clunkers, and even good albums are allowed to have a few of those. I think that most songs on Leather Jackets are quite good. Certainly it didn't hurt that a few of them, Hoop of Fire, Gypsy Heart, and Slow Rivers for example, plus two of the album's non-LP B-sides, Billy and the Kids and the crazy good Lord of the Flies, were actually studio outtakes from the Ice on Fire sessions of 1985. No, the problem with Leather Jackets begins with its anemic sounding production style. Very synth-heavy, very electronic, but with no kick or snap or life to it whatsoever. The tracks that were recorded in Holland have a very thin, glassy sound, like they were recorded not at a studio, but at someone's neighborhood Radio Shack. And I don't think it was the band's fault either. I think it was just how the album was mixed. Too murky, and perhaps even too quiet. One is always turning the volume knob, hoping to give the sound some life, but all you get instead is this thin wall of dull sound, and more volume only makes it sound worse. I'd hoped that the vinyl remaster of a few years ago would fix that, but no, even the remastered Leather Jacket still sounds like Leather Jackets, so the problem can't be in the mastering. Whatever the problem is, it's probably too late to fix now. Leather Jackets kinda sucks. My show copy for this one is an original UK Rocket copy, which was cut by Gordon Vickery at London's Townhouse Studios and pressed by PRS London, run out code 420. That's what the label looks like. And yeah, it's the original Leather Jackets. Nothing too special. Number 37. The first in the really sucks category was originally released in September 1997 and produced by Chris Thomas. In fact, this would be the last Elton John album Thomas would ever produce, and maybe it was time for Elton and Thomas to call it a day. The album I'm talking about is, of course, The Big Picture. The Big Picture's first big problem is the writing. In my opinion, maybe about half the album's songs were good enough for Elton to take into the studio, and that includes one song, Live Like Horses, left over from the Made in England songs written almost 3 full years before. The other half maybe could have used more work before going to tape or just not been recorded at all. The album's other big problem, I think, is its production style. It's very artificial sounding, very synthy. Not all but many of its tracks sound like keyboard demos that were just tarted up later on. The only songs from this album that I truly adore are the majestic Live Like Horses, the pensive January, and the album's playout track, Wicked Dreams, which, although it too suffers from keyboard demo syndrome, is refreshingly catchy, upbeat, and energizing. And then there's the matter of the album's cover art, which I think is one of Elton's worst album covers. It looks like the artist was attempting something creative with puked broccoli. And the general design concept was so close to that Stone Roses album cover from 1988 that I'm still kind of surprised there wasn't some legal thing there. Or maybe Elton meant it as an homage to the Stone Roses. Anyway, if I recall, Big Picture is one of Elton and or Bernie's least favorite albums, so I know I'm not completely off base when I say that The Big Picture really sucks. Now, my show copy for this album is the only authorized vinyl copy ever released, the double LP edition remastered by Bob Ludwig and cut to lacquer by Sean McGee at Abbey Road and pressed by GZ Media. Curiously, this vinyl edition appeared in Canadian stores on September 22nd, 2017, 20 years to the day that the album was released originally here on CD. I'll assume that that was just a coincidence and that we weren't supposed to feel like we were celebrating anything. The next Really Sucks album was released in November 2000, just weeks after Elton recorded it that fall at New York's Madison Square Garden. A live recording, this album comprised the best of 2 back-to-back garden shows Elton did that October, which then makes you wonder who the hell came up with the album's title, which was not only misleading, but dreadfully unoriginal. Yes, I'm talking about One Night Only, Elton's first live album of the new century and his first wide-release live album since 1987's Superb, live in Australia. And to Elton's immense credit, and his band's credit too, the performances on One Night Only are great. These were, of course, the same two shows that would produce the home video program of the same name, which was eventually re-released in a bazillion different editions throughout the 2000s. And I'd say, if you want to experience this show, watch the home video. Don't listen to the live album, at least not the album's original presentation on compact disc. I don't know if it was just the Canadian copies, but as CDs go, One Night Only may well be the worst sounding or worst mastered compact disc in the Elton John catalog. To my ears, the original One Night Only CD is so loud and mastered so harshly that the term ear bleeder comes to mind. I'm not sure if that was because of the album's hasty production schedule. It went from live show to live album shipped to stores in less than a month. But I've played that same original CD copy on different systems over the years, some systems much better than others. But even on the good ones, the CD sounds bad. And that album cover, it makes Big Picture's cover art look like a masterpiece. Of all Elton's wide-release albums over the years, I can say with great strength that I think the cover of One Night Only is by far his worst. Indeed, as an album, One Night Only just really sucks. Now, my show copy is not the CD, but rather the 2017 double vinyl edition, pressed by GZ Media, which is the only vinyl version of this album ever released. It was remastered by Bob Ludwig and cut to lacquer by Sean McGee at Abbey Road. And I must say, I'm not sure if Ludwig worked with the same source material as the original CD, but the vinyl version doesn't sound so bad. Who knows, perhaps one day I'll feel inclined to play it more. Next on the Really Sucks list is number 39, Elton's boogie bomb of the late 70s, The Disco Victim of Love, produced by Pete Bellet, Donna Summer's producer, and released in late 1979. In disco terms, Victim of Love is a mediocre album. Not bad, but not great. Either way, that's all it is. The reason I think that it seems so dreadful in Elton's catalog is because it was so different from anything he'd done before, and would remain very different from anything that he'd do after. And no, not different in an innovative or groundbreaking way. That at least depends on how you view it. But to put it another way, if the album has any major problems, I don't think one of them was the music. That Elton didn't write any of the songs, or even play on any of the album's tracks, doesn't sit well with many fans, and I get it. Here's something that presents itself as an Elton John album, even has his face and name on the cover, and yet the only thing on the album even remotely related to Elton John is the use of his voice. So whether you believe the album was good or bad, or whatever you think, from a creative standpoint and from a production standpoint, Victim of Love could have been anyone's album. And I sometimes wonder if Pete Bellet planned it that way, so that if Elton withdrew from the project or decided he didn't like what he heard, Bellet could maybe just retract the lead vocals with someone else. That said, I've long believed the album isn't quite as bad as its reputation suggests. It's been the victim, see what I did there, victim, it's been the victim of certain untruths. First among them, the claim that Elton released it after the late 70s disco craze had passed. And yes, the album received from North American critics some of the most hilarious, scathing reviews of any album by any artist that I have ever read. But there are places on this earth that aren't North America. And if you read original reviews from overseas, from the UK for example, where disco never really died, it just evolved into a series of subgenres, there the reviews of Victim of Love ranged from lukewarm to downright glowing. One critic, and I had to read their review multiple times just to make sure it wasn't a joke, called Victim of Love superb. And still another critic claimed that Victim of Love was so good that it would likely begin a new chapter for Elton's career. So how the album was received depended on geography, and claims that it was universally panned by critics are just inaccurate. Another misconception is that the album's chosen genre is traditional disco. It isn't, or at least it wasn't intended to be. At a time when many artists were releasing disco albums that deliberately fused disco with other musical genres, famous among those Ethel Merman's album of disco show tunes and Myron Floren's Disco Polka, which is a really kick-ass album if I may say so. As contemporary sources reveal, Elton and Pete Bellet conceived Victim of Love as a disco rock album, history's first, hence their choice of opening track, the rock and roll pioneer Johnny B. Good, although Elton's 8-minute disco version maybe wasn't quite as good as Barry's original. If you ask me, Elton's version was, if I may borrow a phrase from the late Roger Ebert, a horrible experience of unbearable length. Good thing then that Victim of Love is one of Elton's shortest albums. I do enjoy playing it sometimes when I drive on long trips. I sing along and it keeps me awake. Otherwise, as an Elton John album, Victim of Love really sucks. Or as one North American critic put it, this is one album where the real victim is the listener. Now my show copy is the original French Rocket issue, pressed by PRS France, run out code 380. And I think I showed you this in a recent video. It's a generic Rocket label design, but it's the coloring is different, silver and black, which, you know, is nice. Perhaps one of the only nice things about this copy. What album is worse than Victim of Love, you ask? Well, on my list, there are two. This one, the last of my It Really Sucks albums, and that's Duets, released in November 1993 and recorded with 1 million different producers and at 1 million different studios around the world. Originally conceived as a collection of Elton's previously released duets, in response to a trend in the adult contemporary charts, the Duets project quickly morphed into an album of mostly new tracks, recorded with contemporary artists, from hip-hop's PM Dawn, remember them, to icons like Tammy Wynette, Leonard Cohen, and Little Richard. I like Elton's duet with Kiki Dee, a cover of Cole Porter's True Love, which almost became a UK Christmas #1 that year, too bad that it wasn't. And of course, Elton's live duet with George Michael, which had been a huge hit 2 years before, but until Duets hadn't appeared on any Elton John album. But other than that, I really don't like much on this album, not much at all. It's so boring, so unoriginal, so syrupy, and so blatantly commercial that you'd think it was conceived as a special release just for Hallmark stores, or free with your purchase of a new minivan. Indeed, just as Elton was beginning to feel his balls again with 1992's The One, in 1993 he released Duets, the musical equivalent of erectile dysfunction. Thank goodness his mojo returned less than a year later when he recorded the truly superb Made in England. Now my show copy is this 1993 UK Rocket original, a double vinyl that I bought many years ago for just $20 Canadian. As one of the few Elton albums never to be reissued on vinyl, big surprise there, Duets in its original double vinyl edition doesn't fetch much beyond maybe about $40 American. Mainly because I imagine though copies are scarce, the real question is, who's fighting for copies of this? Well, this is it, number 41, dead last on my list. And an album so bad I thought that it deserved its own category, Sucks Out Loud. And that album is The Lockdown Sessions, released in 2021. One reason this episode took me so long to finish was that I couldn't put into words how much I don't enjoy this album, and not at the same time offend people in some way. Let's put it this way. On this album, whether Elton's performing with artists of his own general age and of comparable status, or he's supporting newer artists, as I'm sure he would put it, Elton feels out of place in some way on just about every track. It doesn't sound at all like an Elton John album, and although we can't fault an artist for wanting to take chances or try new things, I think Elton too easily gave too much of his own power away to the other artists that he worked with on this album. And that's all fine and noble in one way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it would produce great results. If Duets was erectile dysfunction, then Lockdown Sessions is chopping the balls off completely. To my ears, it's a very awkward collection of songs that sound like the kind of marketing strategy collaborations one would expect to hear on other artists' albums, or on the soundtracks of movies you've never heard of before, or on some obscure tribute album compilation. In other words, tracks that the Elton of yesteryear would never have dreamed of including on any album of new material. But in the case of the Lockdown Sessions, we get a whole album of these tracks. To my ears, these collaborations sound forced and uninspired. Now, having said all that, I make a huge exception for the Pinau creation, Cold Heart, which was an international smash, and rightly so. It's a great record, thanks in large part to Pinau, of course. But there's another point. When was the last time Elton had any kind of chart success that wasn't also a collaboration with another artist that also didn't heavily rely on that other artist's contribution? These days it seems Elton can't make any new record without another artist propping him up. And sure, it's great to collaborate with others, but there's a time and a place. Elton hasn't made a new album of completely new material by himself in nearly 10 years. So for me, the Lockdown Sessions isn't just a bad album. I could be wrong, but I fear it may be a kind of sign that after nearly 60 years of excellence, things might finally be winding down for our beloved king. Maybe. I guess we'll see. Anyway, after all that, I do have a show copy to share with you. And it's this. It's one of the original double vinyl issues, but it's not the black vinyl. It's the blue vinyl. And I think in some parts of the world, this blue vinyl edition was commonplace, like for instance Canada. In Canada, if you can find a black vinyl copy of this, is worth a fortune. The blue vinyl copies will stand up in your lunch. But as I understand it, in the United States, the black vinyl copies were much more common, and the blue vinyl copies a lot more difficult to find. Can't even fit the record back in. So that's it for my list. Thanks for watching, as always. Please click like and consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. And thank you, of course, to those who've already subscribed. I thank you all for your ongoing viewership and support. Lots more fun ahead, I promise.